Hey fellow Tamers and DigiDestined, it's Mike, AKA Synaku from Overground, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be further exploring the best decks in every color that you can potentially take with you to the Nationals event, and that are the best decks in a post-EX format, following the release of the new Classic Collection coming out next week. In the previous episode, we went through the color blue, and I went over the three best decks, in my opinion, that were good for the blue color that you could take with you into this new format. Today, I'm going to be covering the color red, and there's going to be two decks specifically that I feel are going to be very strong as we go into this new format with the release of the new EX-1 cards. So let's go ahead and get right into it. The first deck that we're going to be looking at is Agu Aduband. Now, the first deck that we looked at for blue, the last episode, was Agu Aduband, and there's a lot of similar notes that we're going to hit with this deck as well. You can see already that we're already playing the opposite Ancient package. So we were playing Ancient Greymon in the blue episode. Today we're going to be playing Ancient Greymon to complement our Bond of Bravery. And then we're also taking advantage of the new Analog Youth, because we're going to be going for a similar strategy to make sure that we're playing top-end Digimon that when they self-destruct under their own circumstances, we can take advantage of Analog Youth to keep the turn on our side of the memory gauge by putting it back to zero, or even back even further depending on where we are in terms of giving our opponent memory. And this also allows us to hatch an additional egg to make sure that we can evolve over top of it and set up another line for the next turn to maintain a constant stream of aggression. And while the Agu Aduband deck aimed to control the game through its source of aggression, this version of Agu Aduband tries to just completely burn your opponent out of the game by the first couple of turns. You're not caring what they're doing, you're remaining completely ignorant of their board state. You're just going directly for the face every single turn, and you're hitting with multiple security checks multiple times. And your goal is just to get their security down to zero as fast as humanly possible, and then you just snipe in with a hybrid for game. Similar to the Agu Aduband strategy, the two of them share very similar win conditions and similar kind of end-of-game mechanics, but in this circumstance, there's a lot more destruction, and there is a lot more means to kind of keep your opponent under a tremendous amount of pressure. So let's go ahead and get into the card by card. So for our babies, we're playing 4 copies of Raymond. As we just discussed, we're constantly going into our opponent's face. We're constantly attacking their security, so we want to make sure that we have that extra DP buff when we do that. And to complement that, we're just playing 1 copy of Digimon. Similar effect, as long as our opponent has 5 or more cards in trash, we can make sure that we still get that plus 1,000. On to our rookies. We're playing 2 copies of Flamemon, similar to the Strabimon that we played in the blue version, equivalent as well, I guess. It serves the same purpose. It lets us dig into our extra hybrids that we now have to play to complement our Ancient Greymon, as well as gets us into our red Tamers, which in this case are going to be Ty and Marcus. Now moving on to the Agumons, which is pretty much the bread and butter of the deck, because this is, at the end of the day, a Bond of Bravery deck, so we want to play as many Agumons as possible. We're playing 4 copies of the BT6 Agumon. This is the same complement opposite to the BT6 Gabumon, whereas if a Tamer with Ty in its name comes into play, we gain 1 memory during all turns, and this inheritable is that if our name is Bond of Bravery, we get an extra security attack. Playing 4 copies of the new Agumon from EX-1. Again, this is the red equivalent of what the Gabumon was that we saw in the previous video, where on attack declaration as inheritable, we reveal the top 3 cards of our deck, add 1 Tamer card or 1 Digimon card with Agumon in its name. That allows us to fetch the remaining Agumons that we have in our list, as well as our Bond of Bravery itself. We're playing 2 copies of the Promo 0.0 Agumon, and this is the one where for 5 cost you can on-play delete something with 3,000 or less. This seems a little out of place in this deck, but when we get to Skull Greymon down here, we'll discuss why this is actually kind of neat. It does retain the 0 Digivolution cost, so we can Digivolve into Raising if we absolutely need to, and the idea is that we want to actually get it in trash later, so we can revive it with the Skull Greymon effect to add an extra layer of interruption and destruction against our opponent. And then finally, writing that out, we're playing 4 copies of the starter deck 7 Agumon. This is the one where on attack declaration against an opponent, we get plus 2,000 DP for the turn. Just want to give ourselves enough DP buff so we're not, if we run into opposing bonds or opposing ancients in our opponent's security, we will survive those checks and keep kind of shredding through with those bonus security attacks. Then moving on to our level 4s, our champion lineup consists of 3 Agunimons, 3 copies of the Promo Greymon. This is the one where if we're evolved over top of an Agumon, we gain security attack plus 1. And then we're playing 4 copies of the Promo Agunimon. Similar to the Promo Lobomon, in this case, when we attack with it, we pay 2 to go into an Ancient Greymon. And now we're playing 3 level 5s, which is 3 of the new EX-1 Skull Greymon. In the previous Gabumon list, we weren't playing any level 5s at all, and that's because we probably didn't really need them. And in this circumstance, we don't necessarily need them, but if we have them, there's actually a cool few tricks that we can do with it. So this Skull Greymon evolves for 3, and it has Greymon in the name, so it already combos with our Marcus if we ever want to declare an attack with it. It has Security Attack +1 natively, and because it has 8,000 base, it combos really well with our babies and our other inheritables. If we were to have the starter deck Agumon underneath, for example, with a Debbie Marimon, we're now swinging for 11,000 with Security Attack +1, which is actually very strong in this format. But it actually has a neat effect after that, where at the end of an attack, we can delete this Digimon, and then on deletion, we play one Agumon from our trash suspended without playing its memory cost. So this does 2 things for this deck. First of all, it becomes an additional self-destruct target that allows us to trigger our Analog Youth. In Analog Youth, if you remember in the previous Gabumon list as well, it allows us to keep the memory gauge on our side, or at least still at 0 whenever we trigger all our end-of-turn procedures. It also allows us to hatch an additional egg for the turn to constantly evolve into a rookie and keep that stream of pressure going, because we can keep building up our raising stack, so we always have something to pressure our opponent with every single turn. And the reason why Skull Greymon is very important, and a little bit better in this list relative to the Gabumon one, is because it doesn't have to get us into a position where we pass the memory gauge over to our opponent's turn to have it destroy itself to trigger our Analog Youths. So in the previous list, while we were constantly putting ourselves in positions to play 1-cost, 2-cost cards to kind of manipulate the memory gauge in a way where we could get full value out of our Analog Youths, with Skull Greymon, instead, all we have to do is declare an attack with it, and then when it destroys itself, our Analog Youths become active immediately, and it gives us that ability to get into that full value new stack as soon as it blows itself up. And this combos really well with this new Agumon, as we see, because we can bring it out for free without having to pay its memory cost, and we can go ahead and we can further interrupt our opponent's board a little bit more. But with any Agumon that we bring back out, depending on how much field presence our opponent has amassed, if this Agumon can live to see another day, it actually gives us another prime potential to go into Bond of Bravery without necessarily having to leave an Agumon in our raising area. So now let's move on to our level 6s and 7s. We are playing 4 copies of Ancient Greymon, and Ancient Greymon reads that for every Greymon or Digimon with hybrid in its form in its sources, it gets Security Attack +1. Now, the way this deck is designed, we're not meant to get our Ancient Greymon into one big Security +3/4 attacker. At most, we're ever going to be getting Security Attack +1 with this Ancient Greymon, maybe 2 if we have another Flamemon underneath, but you'll never be able to get like a full stack of Greymons because the only level 5 we're playing is Skull Greymon, and he is not treated as red, so we cannot evolve over top of him. But the way you generally want to play this deck is that, as we've discussed with Analog Youth, when we have these constant stream of Security +1 attackers coming in every single turn, and we have a consistent way to hit those Security +1 attackers between the Greymon, between the Ancient Greymon, and between the Bond of Bravery itself, we will probably be able to close the game out in maybe 3 to 4 turns tops, while constantly keep our own opponents off of their own stuff and keeping their board absolutely bare. And the way we're going to do that is through our extra removal cards. So the other level 7 we're playing is going to be Bond of Bravery. When attacking, if we have a Tamer in play, we get to delete a Digimon 13,000 or less, and once per turn, if we delete a Digimon, not necessarily through this effect, but if an opponent's Digimon is deleted, period, we actually have to trash the top card of their security stack. So ideally, you want to be doing a lot of pot shots through something like, on your ideal turn 1 would be either a Greymon or an Ancient Greymon, and your ideal turn 2 would be another Greymon or another Ancient Greymon. And you'll put your opponent to a position where they only have 1 security left, and then on your following turn, you would go bring up an Agumon, evolve into Bond of Bravery, swing with that Bond of Bravery, you would trash the top security with its deletion effect, and then that attack that is now going through will be considered the attack for game. And if they had any blockers in play, you would just delete it immediately, and then that would secure you the victory right away. And to further keep your opponent off any blockers, these are the removal cards that we're playing to kind of keep us ahead, and that's going to be Atomic Blaster. And Atomic Blaster, in combination with this Agumon here that you can get off the Skull Greymon effect, means that we're constantly going to be making sure that our opponent's board is very, very thin. They're not going to have a bunch of small attackers that they can kind of use to go after you. And if they're trying to build up any stacks and get to a level 5 or a level 4 that they're keeping on board, Atomic Blaster will generally make quick work of that instead. The only thing this deck has a difficult time dealing with is if your opponent has a established flashed level 6 on board, in which that case, Bond of Bravery would just take care of it itself. The only thing this deck struggles completely against, in theory, would be something like Craniumon. Following up with our option lineup, we are playing 2 copies of the new card from EX-1, which is Emergency Program Shutdown. If you're familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh terms, this is basically what we would call a cold wave. So on play for 3, our opponent can't use any option cards until the end of their next turn. And this is here to kind of outplay your opponent playing Ice Wall against you. Blue, especially Gabubon Blue, is going to be a very prevalent deck in Nationals format, and especially post EX-1 format, because it is probably the most popular deck, I believe, by far. And with the release of Ice Wall, a lot of people are going to be on it, especially since they want to get as much value and use out of it before it gets limited. So Emergency Program Shutdown allows us to have these very aggressive turns and then slam this down and make sure that we're not going to get hit on the back crack with a card that would potentially stun us out of the game. And this means we're also going to be impervious to opposing Cocytus Breaths, opposing Rattle Stars, opposing Hammer Sparks that our opponent would probably want to play to get further ahead. They're not going to be able to do any of that. And Emergency Program Shutdown is likely going to be the last card you play for the turn, which means that that's going to be the final thing that pushes the memory gauge over that allows you to then get your Analog U shenanigans. Then to round out our Tamer lineup, we're playing 2 copies of Marcus, primarily playing it here just as a memory setter to put us to 3 that we can get our bonus memory through tie, and then it is another team that we can evolve over with a Gunimon to close the game out. And to complement that, we're going to be playing 4 copies of tie as well, because we're going to be promoting Greymons or Agumons consistently. This will ensure that we can keep digging through our deck to get into all of our combo pieces and keep giving us more memory to make sure that we have enough memory to play out our turn successfully as well. And then finally, to round out our Tamer lineup, we're playing the 2 copies of Analog Youth that we've kind of discussed a bit more at length, so there's not really much to say in this capacity. So that is it for the Aguband list. This is not necessarily the best list, but this is just kind of a template that I'm following right now that I'm going to be testing a little bit more once I finally get my hands on EX-1 cards. Let's go into the next red deck that I believe is going to be a strong contender for Nationals format, and that is Jesmon. Now, Jesmon didn't get a lot of new cards added from EX-1, but the one that I did add I feel is going to be very impactful for the deck overall. So let's go ahead and talk about this card by card and kind of talk about how and where Jesmon sits kind of in the format as a whole. So for the babies here, we're playing 4 copies of Demi-Meramon and then 1 copies of Baby Demon. Let's look at our rookies. We're playing 4 copies of Huckmon. This is kind of the staple in all Jesmon strategies. On play, we reveal the top 5 cards of our deck. We have to get to add 2 Digimon cards with Huckmon, Jesmon, or Sistermon in their names, and put the rest at the bottom. And the next rookie we're going to look at is actually a new inclusion from EX-1, and that is the EX-1 Biomon. This is a really cool inheritable where once per turn when this Digimon attacks a player, we get to draw a card. In previous drafts of Jesmon list, this spot was sometimes reserved for the 0.0 Biomon, where if we destroyed a Digimon by battle, we get to draw a card. And while Jesmon can get piercing through its own effect, you're not generally attacking over Digimon very often this deck. You're generally going to be building up to your Jesmon and then just kind of going after your opponent's security. And the rest of your deck and the rest of your effects are kind of going to be doing all the extra legwork to take care of your opponent's Digimon. So with this Biomon, this allows us to constantly get a free draw that is less dependent on very specific restrictions. And because we're playing a few bricks in the deck in the form of Sistermons, we want as much free extra draw power as possible. So even if we don't swing with Jesmon immediately that has this Biomon underneath, having this Biomon means that no matter where we are in our evolutionary chain, we can use this as an extra draw engine while also using it as a way to attack our opponent. And to complement that, we're playing 2 copies of the new promo Galamon, and this is where on attack declaration, he himself will draw you a card. So this is just kind of a small consistency engine to kind of make sure that you can see your Jesmon pieces a bit faster and a bit more consistently. And finally, to complement this Galamon, we're playing 4 copies of the new starter deck Galamon. This is the one where when an opponent's Digimon is deleted, we get to draw 1 card. So this kind of also serves the same purpose as what the previous Biomon would have done as well. But without having to actually run over the Digimon through destruction, a Digimon just has to be deleted, period, in order for us to get an additional draw. And this is also the Galamon that has the Warp Evolution stipulation. So if our opponent has a level 6 or higher in play, we can Digivolve into Galamon for a cost of 4. And we are playing the new Galamon from the starter deck as well, which I'll get into as we go further down the list. We are playing an additional rookie in the form of Sistermon Blanc, but I don't necessarily consider her a rookie by natural standards. She just happens to be a level 3, but in the purpose of this deck building, she's just more of a blank, no pun intended. But she is going to be part of the overall Jessamon strategy. There's the two Sistermons in her situation. If we have a Digimon with Huckmon in its name or as a Royal Knight in play, all of our Digimon with Sistermons in their name gain Blocker. And then on play, she lets us draw one card. The rest of the champions we're playing is 4 copies of Bao Huckmon. This is the inheritable where when attacking once per turn, if we have a Sistermon in play, we can delete one of our opponent's Digimon with 5,000 or less. We're playing 4 copies of the Security Attack +1 inheritable Greymon. This just helps us get a bit more aggressive with our Jessamon swings. And then the other level 4 that we're playing is going to be Sistermon Ciel. This is the opposite complement to Blanc. In this case, her effect is that all turns, all Digimon with Huckmon in their names and Royal Knights in their types get plus 2,000 DP. And when she comes into play, we actually get to gain 1 memory. So because we're playing the Sisters, there's not a lot of space to kind of max out on our traditional level kind of chain lineup, so we kind of had to make a lot of concessions in this deck, which is why a lot of people say that Jessamon is very bricky and not very consistent. And I'm trying to kind of flip that on its head by playing more cards that allow me to draw more cards more often, so I can see those specific combo pieces because I'm playing so much less of them compared to a traditional evolution line deck. Because there are only 8 actual champions to evolve into, and there's only 6 actual ultimates that we're going to be evolving into. And speaking of the ultimates, they are Savior Huckmon. So on Digivolve, we could play 1 Digimon with Sistermon in its name from our hand without paying its cost, and it has the inheritable where when attacking, if we have a Sistermon in play, we can unsuspend this Digimon. Finally, we're playing the new War Galamon as well from Starter Deck 7, because he has a very powerful when attacking effect, and that's to delete one of our opponent's Digimon with 3,000 or less. And then it actually has a really cool inheritable on top of that, whereas once per turn, if one of our opponent's Digimon is deleted, we get to gain Security Attack +1. And this will allow us to make sure that we can get a lot of powerful checks through our Jessamon, which is right here. So, when attacking, we can play 1 Sistermon from our hand or our trash, and once per turn, if we play another Digimon this turn, Jessamon himself will get plus 3,000 and piercing. So, this kind of strategy kind of brings itself all together, especially when you look at Judgment of the Blade. And Judgment of the Blade allows us a Digimon with Huckmon in its name or a Royal Knight in its type to attack our opponent's unsuspended Digimon. So, we have a consistency package if we go after our opponent's security, and we also have a consistency package and an aggression package if we actually go through our opponent's Digimon as well, because the piercing will allow us to destroy our opponent's Digimon and generate more advantage and more security attacks as well. But if we decide to just go after them natively, we will have some security attack bonuses already, as well as the ability to get more cards to potentially play out of certain situations where those security checks could go sour. So the other level 6 we're playing in the deck is the new starter deck Galamon. And the reason we're playing this is for 2 reasons. We can warp Digivolve over the Galamon, which puts the Galamon in a situation where it acts as both a level 4 and a level 5 simultaneously. So it kind of takes some of the stress off the fact that we're not playing as many of those additional levels due to the consistency reasons. And we can potentially just skip right up into a Mega without having to worry about drawing the additional evolution lines. But the other reason we're playing Galamon is because he is a Royal Knight in his typing. So that means if we have any other Sistermons in play, he will actually be able to trigger them and put them online. So we will get blockers if we have blocks in play. We'll be able to get additional buffs if we have CLs in play. And because he has Security Attack +1 as well, those additional buffs that we can get from those Sistermons actually translates to a potential where this Digimon will survive his extra security checks as well. And since he is a Royal Knight, he also combos with Judgment of the Blade, which means that he can actually help us have another means to go after our opponent's unsuspended Digimon to help shorten out their field and kind of keep their board in check. And to round off the list, Digimon-wise, we're playing 2 copies of the Blitz Omnimon. This is just something to throw on top of to go for game after we've kind of obliterated the rest of our opponent's securities. For options, we're playing 3 copies of Judgment of the Blade and 2 copies of Gaia Force, and we're finally playing 3 copies of Tai. This is just, again, to help extend our aggression, because if we can get into a Digimon with a full stack with the whole 4 sources underneath, we get an additional security attack +1. So in an ideal world, your Jessamon would have a Greymon, would have a War Growlmon, would have a Tai, and now all of a sudden you're swinging for Security Attack +4, and that's an entire stack. You go into your Blitz Omnimon, and boom, that's the end of the game. So, contrary to the Agu Aduband list that we just looked at, this is very much kind of a one-shot robot deck, right? You want to kind of build up into one giant, powerful stack that just kind of swings for the game, and because of all your Sistermon effects and everything as well, you're generally going to survive, and you have your powerful blocker effects to kind of fall back on the back rack so you don't die. Whereas the Agu Aduband deck, in contrast, is trying to kind of get in through little pot shots while not giving your opponent any interaction. But yeah, so these are the two decks that I feel are going to be the most powerful red decks post EX-1, and probably the red decks that are going to have the most representation going into the new post EX format, as well as what you're going to see at the national event coming up. If you guys had any comments or questions regarding any of the decks that you saw here today, please feel free to leave a comment at the bottom of this video. And if you like what we do here at Overground, please feel free to subscribe to the channel and like the video so we know that this content is getting to you guys. I have been Mike, aka Synaku, once again. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.